The subcommittee will come to order this afternoon. The committee will receive testimony on the posture of the United States Army in the fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Army. Our two witnesses are the Honorable Ryan D. McCarthy, Secretary of the Army, and General James C. McConville, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Both gentlemen have long and distinguished careers. They were appointed to their current positions within the last year, so this will be the first time testifying before us. Thank you very much for being here. We recognize that this is an extraordinary time for the United States Army. Our nation presently has over 187,000 soldiers deployed in 140 countries around the world. These soldiers are the Army's most critical resource. We will talk today about training, equipment, and resources needed to give our soldiers the skills and tools needed to accomplish their missions. But we'd also like to know that the members of this committee care deeply about the welfare and quality of life of our men and women in uniform, and we want to make sure that we take care of their needs as well. We are keenly aware of the need to modernize the Army of today in order to meet potential great power competition in the future. That process began with last year's budget request, and I think you'll agree that the subcommittee struck a balance between supporting your strategy and ensuring that successful ongoing programs continue to receive an appropriate level of resources. The Army's fiscal year 2021 budget request continues to focus on resourcing the national defense strategy. To achieve this goal, the Army continues to conduct night court sessions to review the necessity of existing programs. This process has led to the proposed reduction or cancellation of more than 240 programs in fiscal years 20 and 21. Many of these programs are on time and on budget and bring essential capabilities to our soldiers today. We do want to be your partner in executing this strategy, but not at the expense of key enablers that lead to success on the battlefield today. I support the idea of reviewing your existing programs to determine if there is excess funding, but I do not support funding future programs in which the requirements have not been fully thought out. One example is the recently canceled optionally manned fighting vehicle. This is the Army's third attempt at replacing the Bradley fighting vehicle. 1 month after Congress appropriated $205 million for this program, the Army announced its intention to cancel the solicitation. As a result, the optionally manned fighting vehicle program will now be at least 2 years behind schedule, and the funding we appropriated towards it could have been used to continue supporting one of the fiscal year 20 programs that were reduced or eliminated. This gives us great pause when evaluating the request before us to once again cancel or reduce 80 programs in the fiscal year 2021 budget. We have been told time and again that this time it is different. Yet the Army has a long history of canceling high-profile programs after significant investment of taxpayers' dollars due to the incomplete requirement process. We supported the Army's Futures Command as a way for the Army to consolidate its modernization process under one roof. But the first large acquisition program that has come out of the Army Futures Command has fallen flat. You do need to convince this committee today that our continued support of modernization will eventually be a good investment. I would also like to highlight my concerns about the well-being and quality of life of Army soldiers and their families. Of particular interest to me, as you know, is childcare. We continually hear about soldiers lacking available childcare. The committee has made significant investments in fiscal year 2020 to mitigate this issue. I would like to know what the Army is doing about it. Gentlemen, I have seen the unfunded needs of the Army and across the services, including readiness, improved facilities, and your stated goal of modernizing the force. This committee wants to be your partner in achieving your goals, but it is imperative that we are investing wisely. And please assure us today that your budget request prioritizes quality of life. With that, before we hear your testimony, I will want to turn to Mr. Calver for any opening comments he has. But I would also just suggest, because votes will potentially start in the middle of this hearing, that given our prime location, we will simply continue the hearing and each of us exit, go vote, and please come back. But with that, Mr. Calvert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General McConville, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come talk to us. The fiscal year 2021 budget request continues the second year of the Army's bold modernization transformation. While I fully support the Army's efforts to focus on near-peer threats, I have concerns with the implementation of your modernization enterprise thus far. As you have noted, Mr. Secretary, the Army's modernization plans assumes flat budgets. We cannot therefore afford costly mistakes like those that have plagued the Army acquisition in the past, nor can we afford excessive delays. So the Chairman and I are basically on the same page. Already we've discovered that the Russians, for instance, they fielded a hypersonic weapon while we're still trying to develop one. So, what was that? The Chinese have hacked in. There you go. So failing is not an option. Failing early is even a bad option, a worse option. But I share the Chairman's concern about this Army modernization effort, and specifically the optionally manned fighting vehicle, the OMFV, and be interested in what lessons you've learned thus far and what you think you can do to improve the process. And so that'll certainly be in my question, and I think the Chairman's question is also. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Our nation faces unprecedented threats from near-peer adversaries such as Russia and China, and continued harassment from the rogue regimes of North Korea and Iran. Because of this, our soldiers need the absolute best equipment to defend our nation and the American way of life. I'm interested to hear how you're modernizing the Army in a way that leverages our industry partners and gives our soldiers and their families the support they need and deserve. While I wholly support the reasons we need to modernize, I do have concerns the Futures Command is trying to do too much too quickly. I hope you'll explain today how Futures Command plans to execute this bold strategy while ensuring that the Guard and Reserve are at the same level of readiness as the active duty Army. Thank you both. I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, and with the indulgence of the members, I would want to assure Mr. Calvert that I would unusually recognize Mr. Ryan first for questions so that he can leave, if that would be all right. So in that event, I would recognize Secretary in General for your testimony.
We're recognized, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Chairman Visclosky, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your continued support to the Army and our people. In 2018, the National Defense Strategy outlined the current and future threat picture, drastically changing the Army's focus. The strategy outlined great power competition, specifically Russia and China, who are rapidly investing to modernize their formations. In order to achieve national objectives laid out in the defense strategy, including deterrence, the Army, with the support of Congress, developed three distinct priorities of readiness, modernization, and reform, and aligned our budget against the same. 2.5 years into our modernization efforts, we're here to finish what we've collectively started. This budget requests upon the funding and authorities that Congress provided over the last 2 years. Together, we're creating irreversible momentum towards a ready, modernized, multi-domain Army, capable to meet future demands, highlighting the NDS. Our FY21 budget request is $178 billion. 60% of that top line is invested in our people and towards operations and maintenance, with the remainder of our available budget aligned towards our modernization priorities. Despite a fixed top line and a flat budget, demand for Army forces continues to rise. The Army currently fulfills 60% of the overall combatant commander's demands, with no projected decrease in COCOM demand. Demand, paired with the need to bring new systems online, will require us to grow the budget 3 to 5% real growth in the out years. Readiness remains the Army's top one priority. We remain ready today, capable of dynamic force projection. Take, for example, this year on New Year's Eve, we pushed a brigade-size element on a no-notice, cold start, emergency deployment. Within hours, soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division went from holiday parties to wheels up on a C-17. Within a day, soldiers were operating in the Middle East. Nearly half of our brigade combat teams are at the highest levels of readiness, pulling us from a readiness trough to a readiness peak over the last 3 years. On modernization, We're rapidly developing new technologies across 6 modernization priorities and 31 signature systems, all geared towards meeting the demands of the future battlefields. The creation of Army Futures Command has allowed us to combine the stakeholders together and rapidly increase the speed of the modernization process. We're seeing real results. Prototypes that began in FY18 and 19 are maturing, with real capability that will land in 21 and 22. In this fiscal year, we'll increase soldier touch points, test shots, capability demonstrations, and the fielding of our formations. The Army is investing $800 million across the next 5 years towards cloud computing, which is central to our modernization effort. Long-range fires, including IRCA, PRISM, and hypersonic missiles, flying further and hitting their targets, increasing our reach and lethality essential in deterrence in a joint fight. We've invested $1.3 billion towards these efforts, and continued funding will allow the Army to field a road mobile battery in hypersonics in FY23. New aircraft in our future vertical lift portfolio are flying hundreds of test hours as we fly before we buy. We've seen great advances in our soldier lethality portfolio for individual kit, with integrated visual augmentation system that links multiple sensors to multiple shooters and multiple command and control nodes, ultimately increasing lethality and survivability for our men and women. The demand for Army forces, paired against a flat budget, has forced tough fiscal decisions. In-depth program reviews will continue in FY21, with a total target of $9.1 billion in programs that will be delayed, reduced, or eliminated. The Army will continue to show fiscal responsibility with taxpayer dollars. We view every dollar as to do with ammunition. Each bullet matters and is aimed at a target. With Congress's steadfast support, we're here to finish what we collectively started. I'd like to share the floor with my teammate, General McConville, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. And Chairman Vlasky, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the committee, I also want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for the support you all continue to give the Army and our people, our soldiers, our families, our civilians, and our soldiers for life, our retirees and veterans. As this morning, the Army has over 189,000 soldiers deployed in 140 countries around the world. Those soldiers form the leading edge of an Army that stands ready to fight and win whenever and wherever it's called. We are currently demonstrating Army readiness with our Defender 20 exercise in Europe, the largest of its kind in 25 years, and we'll do the same in the Pacific in the fall on a smaller scale. Both exercises will further strengthen not only our readiness to deploy U.S. Army forces, but to also increase our ability to fight alongside our allies and partners and deter those nations or groups who wish America harm. Going forward, we'll stay in the tactical readiness of our units, while at the same time ensuring we are strategically ready to mobilize, deploy, and sustain our combat forces in a way that supports how we will fight in the future. To ensure that the Army will be ready and can win the future, we must also modernize, as the Secretary and I have discussed with many of you. The National Defense Strategy is focused on great power competition, but great power competition does not have to mean great power conflict. A ready, modern, and multi-domain Army provides the nation's strategic leaders with flexible options to compete below the threshold of armed conflict while maximizing deterrence. With timely, adequate, predictable, and sustained funding, we will deliver an Army that will never be outranged, outgunned, or overmatched. But get to the Army we need in the future requires transformational change, not incremental improvements. Our FY21 budget request supports that transformational change. It aligns resources with the National Defense Strategy and our Army priorities. It also balances the demands for readiness now and allows us to invest in the future. Our budget request maintains 58 Brigade combat teams, 23 Aviation Brigades, and 6 Security Force Assistance Brigades across the regular Army, Army National Guard, and Army Reserves. It enables 24 combat training center rotations, including 4 for the National Guard. It funds strategic readiness, including dynamic force employments to Europe and the Indo-Pacific, and maintains the maintenance of key prepositioned stocks and ammunition. It provides modest end strength growth to meet the expanding operation requirements and promotes interoperability with allies and partners through combined exercises with countries around the world. In terms of modernization, our request supports the continued development of the Army's multi-domain operation concept, which will inform our contributions to the emerging joint warfighting concept. Our request funds multi-domain task forces in Europe and the Pacific to increase Army capabilities in both competition and conflict. And our budget request supports critical steps in research and development that will allow us to deliver key systems across our 6 modernization priorities. Finally, our budget helps us win the war for talent by funding key quality life initiatives and moving us from an industrial age personnel management system to a 21st century talent management system with a continued implementation of the integrated personnel and pay system and initiatives like talent-based branching, the Army Talent Alignment Process, and the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. Thank you for your time and support to the Army. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2018, the Army embarked on an ambitious modernization effort by establishing Army Futures Command, while shifting the Army's focus from counterinsurgency to near-peer threats. One of the primary benefits of Army Futures Command, we were told, was that it would bring together all relevant stakeholders, including industry, at earlier points in the requirements to develop in the development process. This would allow the Army to provide capabilities to soldiers more quickly and more cost-effectively. Yet 2 months ago, the Army withdrew its solicitation for the optionally manned fighting vehicle, or OMFV, and decided to restart the program because it admitted its own requirements were too stringent for industry. It's now going back to square one. Then last month, we learned that the Army had decided to defer a decision on selecting a system for its indirect fire protection capability program, even though it said last year that it would make a decision by the second quarter of this year. I have to tell you, gentlemen, that these decisions have produced significant concern in Congress, obviously from both sides of the aisle, and industry regarding the Army's modernization process. Looking specifically at the optionally manned vehicle decision, I have 2 questions. First, I understand you all conducted an after-action review to understand what went wrong with the process. BAE pulled out early due to conflicting requirements. Why didn't you stop then and reassess? Why should we have confidence at this time that you'll get it right, especially when it seems you're returning to the normal Army acquisition process? And secondly, the fielding for the OMFV was scheduled for 2026. As the chairman mentioned, he mentioned delay, but are you still planning for a 2026 fielding? And if so, how can you get there given that you've got to restart this whole program?
Sir, I'll say a few things if I could pass it also to General McConville. Appreciate that. With respect to the RFP, we did have a competitor in the process that could bend the metal and develop a prototype in the process. What the team learned as they went through the whole process of RFP was that in this case they fell short of the requirements that was in the RFP, and that we took a step back from the table, making a judicious decision not to keep going down the path and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a system that would never be able to achieve the outcomes we were looking for. So from that standpoint, if you look at us historically, we would have kept going and we would have spent billions of dollars. We think that the way that we're organized against the problem now, by fusing all of the stakeholders together, we're getting the best, most informed recommendations from the Army Modernization Enterprise. Chief?
Yes, Congressman, I could add is I think we learned early on this program, and what we learned was there was confusion over the requirements, and so we just came out with the characteristics of what we want in this vehicle, because we don't want to get to our requirements until we actually see what the prototype is going to be. And by doing this, we've come out with the 9 characteristics that we would like to see in this vehicle. And what we will do is go out to industry. We're working with industry right now. We're going industry, non-traditional industry, to see what type of technology they'd like to see in this vehicle. They will come back to us with a design, and we'll pick 5 designers that come up with the best designs, and also 5 technologies that we look at inserting into the vehicle. From that, we'll refine the characteristics. We'll go to a detailed design, and then do the same thing again and go to prototype. And once we get the prototype and see what they can actually produce, not in PowerPoint, but actually what they can produce and we can drive, we will refine the requirements, and then we'll have the competition. We think we could save time up front, and we can get the vehicle we need before we invest a lot of money in it, and have the requirements that we know that industry can meet.
Well, that, I mean, that sounds great, General, but I wonder why we didn't start this process, a long time ago. I thought we were going to move down this, what happened?
I think what happened, Congressman, is we have learned. We are learning with industry. We're learning with our acquisition folks who are used to doing it the old way, where we spent a lot of time, 5 to 7 years, developing requirements, and then 5 to 7 years developing a system, and then investing a lot of money in it, and finding out at the end we didn't get what we wanted. So we are stopping early, and we are redefining the way we do the process to encourage innovation.
Finally, I just want one comment. I used to be in the construction business. Usually the happiest day of my life was when somebody asked for a redesign or or some kind of change order that I would understand would be more profitability on my side of the transaction. So I would hope that whatever you come up with, and hopefully it's soon, is that you get a set of plans and you go to bid on those set of plans, in effect, get the contractors to come forward and stick with it, because these changes can only cost the United States government money and time, which you don't have either one. So that's my comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the indulgence here and want to associate myself to the gentleman from California's line of questioning. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, but there's some correlation. We know that the enlisted soldiers are only using about half of their meal entitlement, basic daily food allowance funds per day, and that's roughly $170 unspent every month. Obviously, none of us want to see an already cash-strapped soldier leave $170 a month on the table, let alone spend additional money out of their pocket to eat. We also know that the reason soldiers so often fail to eat in dining facilities is because those soldiers may not be able to get to the dining facility in time for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, given their training and the other demands that they have. That's why I've been pleased with the Army's commitment to move to campus-style dining concept, whereby soldiers will be able to use their full meal entitlement, not just in the dining facilities, but in the AFES facilities, MWR facilities, and even someday at off-base establishments that offer a healthier menu. Essentially a system similar to that which most colleges and universities have had for decades. I understand that this is a work in progress, and it will take time to work out the kinks, but I want to put a marker down before the Army goes too far down any particular path, planning path. The Army should expand where soldiers are allowed to spend basic daily food allowance funds. The Army should not seek alternative funding to be used to buy meals in non-dining facilities unless those funds are being requested for technology or facility upgrades that are necessary to make the campus-style dining concept work better. And if there's a DoD policy that you believe prevents the Army from using BDFA funding for the full cost of a meal outside dining facilities, or otherwise limits the ability of the Army to create an efficient and well-integrated campus-style dining model, I encourage you to pursue such a waiver. Similar to what the Air Force was granted when the Air Force began its food transformation initiative, which included a campus dining model. We want to work with you to get this right, because if we do it correctly, we can save soldiers money, greatly improve their health and mission performance, and save the U.S. taxpayer money. So with that all said, can you provide the subcommittee any updates on the Army's progress with respect to its food modernization efforts and campus-style dining reform?
Sir, I can tell you a specific example from just the first week of February. I was out at Fort Wainwright, and they're doing that in the barracks there, constructing very similar concept like you just mentioned. It's been a challenge because we've seen the lack of participation at large volumes in the chow halls. There have been a lot of investments that have been made in the chow halls to also change the menus, putting dietitians down at unit level. So we've made a lot of investments with holistic health and fitness to address this, and to your point, configuring the barracks in the case of Fort Wainwright to do just that. We could also provide more information how we're doing this comprehensively across the Army to the committee.
Okay, I want you to know this is something that I feel very, very strongly about. One of the other committees I sit on in the Appropriations subcommittees is the Veterans Affairs, the VA. And when you look at, you know, what we want from a performance level, obviously there's a money issue here of leaving this money on the table, and I have one follow-up question to that. But we've got to make sure, when you're looking at the obesity rates in the Army, Navy, Air Force, it's unacceptable. I mean, it really is, it's unacceptable that we are spending this much money, and the number one and best investment we could make is into the men and women who serve, and to making sure that, as you said, dietitians, nutritionists, making sure that they're functioning at a very, very high level. I mean, you look at these peak athletes and what they do to make sure they're performing at the highest level, it's the same thing here. And I want us to start adopting that mentality. So we're going to work with you. We want to stay on this issue and continue to try to drive down the cost, because then on the other end, I'll leave here and I'll go to a VA subcommittee hearing and look about how much money we're spending on VA health care around diabetes and obesity and all these things that started when they were active duty. And then we go to the taxpayer and say we need more money. The taxpayer thinks we're crazy. So we need to figure out how to make this happen. So one follow-up question. I know when you, as the Army, put together the budget for feeding soldiers, my understanding is that it uses a simple calculation of number of soldiers entitled to meals times the basic daily food allowance per soldier. And so now if soldiers are leaving approximately $170 spent every month, that adds up to hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of a year that's unaccounted for. Either the Army dining facilities are purchasing and preparing 3 meals a day per soldier and then wasting half the food, or the money is not being spent on the soldier's food and it's being spent on something it wasn't appropriated for. So I'm not really sure what is worse, but if you could, Mr. Secretary, share with us maybe where these unspent funds are going.
Congressman, I would have to check with our finance folks and get back to the committee on that.
Okay, I mean, these are the kind of things I think I sit here and listen to my Republican colleagues talk about this. The Democrats are talking about this. Like, we're spending a ton of money on these programs, and this is just one example around food that there's $170 a day, hundreds of millions of dollars. Mr. Chairman, we don't know where it's going. And I understand, Mr. Secretary, you've got a lot of interests and a lot of things and a lot of programming that you got to keep your eye on. But here is a perfect example of how we can save money in the military. And, you know, we're talking about cutting SNAP programs and cutting other programs, and you look at the budget for the next year, only $2.5 billion to spread a lot non-defense discretionary money to spread across 11 other subcommittees, $2.5 billion. And you're talking about near-peer competition with China and Russia, and we don't have the resources to invest into STEM and education and research and infrastructure and all these things that are the core component to our competition with them. We only have 330 million people in the country, so we better all be at our best. And I want to start with the men and women in the military. I want to know where this money's going so that we can find out how to repurpose it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I would associate myself with Mr. Ryan's concerns and assume that you will get back to the committee in detail. Okay? Ms. Granger?
The Future Vertical Lift Program is the first major aviation modernization program in years and the Army's #3 modernization priority. Can you please update us on the progress of the program and tell us if it remains on schedule?
Yes, Congressman Granger, we are trying to bring on 2 platforms into the formation, an attack reconnaissance version as well as a long-range assault aircraft. At present, we're looking at the down select in the competition for both platforms, looking to do that later this month. which will get us down to, I think it's what, two competitors? Two competitors for the lift. There's two competitors for the assault platform, and then one on the long-range assault platform they'll build prototypes. So that down select, they'll go out and produce full-up prototype variants for us to test. And then we'll continue to ramp the investment. We have about over $1 billion invested in the vertical lift platform this year. So we're making some very big decisions here and continue to work with and really yield the benefit of industry, who's investing about $4 to 1 with their development dollars. So we've harnessed a lot of good, the positive energy from the industry in bringing 2 new capabilities into formation.
We're very excited about what industry is doing, is because they're investing a lot of their own money. They're showing us that they can actually fly and demonstrate for us that capability. And there's 2 major competitors out there we've seen right now that have very innovative capabilities that are going to provide us a significant overmatch in the future. So the fact that we can see what they're doing, this goes along the line that we're trying to get to, is if we can see what they can do when we write the actual requirements from the prototyping, we know they can do that. So we won't be investing in a program that is unattainable because we ask for something that they can't do.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to go back to Army Futures Command. So for the Army to achieve its modernization goals, the Army Futures Command is going to need some help from industry, small business, and not just in Texas. And I like Texas. I can actually sing the state song, or on the coast, but from all over the country. Now, I live in a state where we don't have a large military presence, and because of our business community is located there, it's often overlooked by the Department of Defense. And I can tell you that states like Minnesota and our commercial sector have a lot to offer the Army. I can just think of healthcare, personal protection, equipment, engineering, computing, a whole host of things. My region, other regions like mine, we want to help you find the best solutions for your requirements. But it's going to take engagement from the Army to build those relationships. Now, you're well aware of the GA report last summer was critical of Army's Future Command, small business engagement. So can you tell the committee what changes have been made to Army's future outreach to small businesses since then, particularly in the area of research and development? And how is Army's Future Command ensuring that they reach business communities across the nation, including areas in which the Army normally doesn't do much business because there aren't bases located there, but that doesn't mean there aren't great ideas and great opportunities?
Yes, Congressman. We established a footprint in an Accelerator Hub in Austin, Texas, which will provide us a venue to work with small business in particular, which has attracted a great deal of attention. Very, very similar to an Accelerator Hub that I saw in Minneapolis as well, when we were conducting the due diligence for where we were going to put the headquarters. So what the Accelerator Hub is, it provides an opportunity for Army leaders to sit there and talk about what are the types of capabilities that we need. It creates a venue for small business to learn about where the opportunities lie for Army. Some of the things that we need to improve upon to the point of the report is just the business practices of how we can get contracts written quickly and to get people start funding flowing, because small business's greatest challenge usually is cash flow. And it's how can we get our contract writers to embrace a lot of the authorities that we've been granted from Congress over the past 3 years, so that they can get small businesses on contract and very quickly start procuring this capability, develop prototypes, and then ultimately, would you turn this into a program of record? So we're getting better, but a lot of it came to just developing that platform to do business differently and attract more attention. Congresswoman, I'm not up to speed on that issue. If I could take that for record and get back to the committee, appreciate that.
I was absent during Ms. McCollum's question, but in fact, it was a question I was going to ask about small business, and I would, one, associate myself with her concerns. In fact, was going to quote from the GAO report, and while I appreciate it, I assume the answer was that you are creating a venue and addressing the issue of small business. I would point out the Army's Futures Command has been in existence for 18 months. And we're creating a venue to address small business is not acceptable.
No, sir, it does exist. We've had it in place for about a year. And then what we've learned in the process is just really it's the contractual mechanisms which discourages in most cases small businesses from doing business with the Department of Defense because of the span time required to go through an RFP and to go back and forth and ultimately get on contract to where the funding flows. We've started to use more of the OTA authority that's been granted to us by Congress, and it has been able to get us more businesses involved, in many cases as subs on other existing contractual mechanisms. But we've been able to get more attention from small business community and get more of them involved with our programs.
And Chairman, one of the things we discussed that we've found out with industry is these industry days where we lay out some of the problem sets. And I talked a little about the characteristics of a problem rather than going to a requirements document which allows them to participate, which allows them to bring in their technologies and do it at a beginning level where it's just an idea, where we can bring in ideas, we can give them a little money for their idea, and they can develop that idea, and as they compete, they have a chance to grow in that process.
I would encourage you, I will not be here for next year's hearing. And I would hope it is a more positive message. I just, having been on this subcommittee since 1993, do not believe the Department of Defense has done an adequate job by any measure in engaging small business people. So I would really encourage you to step on the gas here. Mr. Cole.
Did you call me, Mr. Chairman? Thank you very much. I wasn't quite sure. I want to associate myself very much with the remarks of the chairman and the ranking member on concerns just about the procurement process and, you know, constantly making maybe the perfect the enemy of the good. I've been on this committee I've been in Congress long enough, I should say, to have gotten here just after Crusader. I represent Fort Sill. Then lived through the Future Combat System, which was billions of dollars down the drain for nothing, no fieldable. Then the NLOC debacle. And now we finally seem to get something going with PIM, Integrated Management. Had some rough spots, but starting to move. So I understand that the FY20 budget, we allocated enough money for 53 units, and you only procured 48. Can you tell me why?
With respect to Pellet and PIM, sir?
Yes, sir.
There was there's some issues with the production line for Pellet and PIM. Over the last 6 months, they're getting on track, and that's why we've ultimately made the full rate decision. But there were issues with the manufacturer to getting to the tack time down so they could produce the quantities that were on contract.
So they couldn't have produced the 53?
To get to that point, yes, sir. But we're on track now and have confidence that they're...
And can you tell me what you're asking for in the 21 budget?
What's that, sir?
How many units are you asking for in 21?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my
I
head.
think it's like 30, so it's like way down. And I'm wondering why that big a disparity. I mean, we've got a real problem here where we are outgunned, quite frankly, by our peer competitors. Made some progress here, and I'm wondering why we're that dramatically slashing the acquisition and slowing down the program.
The challenge that we had with the manufacturer was just getting the quantities produced on time. We couldn't reach the tack times to hit them in every month. So Dr. Jetty was up there personally getting involved with the manufacturer, went up there 3 or 4 times last year alone. We've been about 5 for 5 for the last 5 months, so we're starting to ramp those quantities back up. But we had to work with the manufacturer on their processes, working with them to make appropriate investments for tooling so that we could decrease the span time so we can make the products faster.
So if we're back up, again, why that big a disparity between 48 and 30?
Sir, we had challenges hitting the targets, and I would defer to Dr. Jetty ultimately, but when we went through this process, it was about can we hit the targets that we put on contract.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, first thing, I've been here for a while. I think Mr. Cole and I came in the same class. In the very beginning, on armed services, I was really concerned about a lot of issues involving the Army. But I think what I've seen, you've come a long way. And I think first under General Milley and Esper, and then you two that taking over now, I have confidence that you're going to do the job. You do have to understand that our job is oversight, and in oversight we need to ask you hard questions and to make sure that you're directed and that we're spending money in the right way. Judge Carter and I are co-chair of the Army Caucus, and we work very closely with you, we want you to keep doing what you're doing. Anything involving contracts and those type of issues, there always seems to be issues. Bidding, who's the right person, and we try to do the best there, but there are issues there, and we've always got to stay on top of that issue. I want to get into hypersonics. I know, especially you, Mr. Secretary, when you were Deputy Secretary, whatever your former job was, we've talked a lot about hypersonic weapons. Other than nuclear weapons and maybe cyber security, it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most dangerous issues we deal with. And unfortunately, Russia and China are ahead of us because of our crazy shutdowns of government and those type of things. But now we're together, we're on a roll, and I'm going to ask you this question. Again, I said I'm very concerned about the hypersonic missile development, and our adversaries are developing hypersonic weapons at a rapid pace. President Putin recently claimed to have developed a hypersonic weapon, and news outlets have shown images of China displaying its platforms during a military parade marking China's 70th anniversary. At last month's Army Caucus breakfast, I was encouraged by the progress Lieutenant General Thurgood and his team at Army Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office have made to develop and test our systems, and also working very closely with Secretary Griffin at the Pentagon. Can you explain the importance of the Rapid Capabilities Critical Technology Office to our strategic modernization efforts, and how its role is different from that of cross-functional teams in Army Futures Command? And can you explain the role of the Army is playing in the development of the Common Hypersonic Glide Body? Did you get that? Okay. And I'm also concerned that inefficient government shutdowns have put us behind our adversaries in hypersonic development, and many believe we're 2 years behind. Do you agree with that? The Army has requested $800 million in this year's budget to support hypersonic missile testing and prototyping. When do you expect to transition from prototypes to production, and does this funding also support development of defensive hypersonic measures?
And Congressman, I'll go ahead and take that, just talk a little about what General Thurgood is doing. As you saw, and we demonstrated that the hypersonics program is moving out extremely quickly. We're going to be announcing very soon the capability to actually test that system and demonstrate that capability. We can talk about that in another venue, how soon that is going to happen. But not only are they doing hypersonics and moving out very aggressively, that's a joint team that's doing that. We're working very, very closely with the Navy. We anticipate having a battery, mobile battery capability in FY2023. We're also aggressively moving out on directed energy. We have that capability at the 50 kW range, and looking at the 300 capability on directed energy. And then we're working integrated with an integrated battle command system, is bringing sensors to shooters together. So what he is doing is taking critical technologies and bringing them together, working very closely with our Futures Command, and bringing these very, very important top priority systems into being very, very quickly. Can you discuss where we are on offense and defense? Well, we're much better on the offense right now, and the defense, we have some work to do on the defense.
Do you agree we're at least 2.5 years behind China and Russia?
I'm not sure that we're 2.5 years behind as far as in capability. We'll know more in a short period of time where we are in relationship to them.
Is the funding that we have in this year's budget enough for you to move forward to do what we need to do?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Thank both the gentlemen for their testimony here today. I want to go back to the modernization initiatives. And man, I know all of them are important. I mean, all you got to do is read the list. But as has been said before, in comparing it to a menu, a lot of entrees here, but you can't eat it all. And we can't have all of these things, but I still know we have to have a prioritization list. So 2 questions about it. One, what are the absolute gotta-haves in these initiatives? And then my second question is, given the discussion that's already happened on the Bradley replacement, how has that shifted the priorities, if they have shifted at all?
Well, Congressman, I'll start. You know, the number 1 priority is long-range precision fires, and I would say within long-range precision fires, number 1 priority is hypersonics, because we've talked about that, and that has got to happen. Within that portfolio, also, we have a precision strike missile system, which is going to go out past 500 kilometers. That's going to give us the ability to penetrate competitors' anti-access area denial capability and hold their ships at risk in the future. We've got to have that. When it comes to extended range cannon, or what we call ERCA, that's the ability that we're basically improving what we have, and we've got to have that. The optional unmanned fighting vehicle, I think we need to have. Right now with the Bradley fighting vehicle, it's coming up on 40 years. We've incrementally improved it. We need to get a new vehicle. We got to get that right, and I think we're gonna make that happen. As far as our aircraft, with the future vertical lift, the future attack reconnaissance aircraft, and the future long-range assault aircraft, we need them both. Again, we're looking at over the next 40 to 50 years, these are the systems that we're going to have. The network we're putting together, we're going to tie in on the air and missile defense. The future on air and missile defense is sensors to shooters. We're going to use artificial intelligence. We're going to use an integrated battle command system. Every radar is a sensor. We're going to have different types of shooters, whether it's directed energy, whether it's Patriot missiles, whether it's THAAD. We will pick the right arrow depending on the system that we're having, but there's multiple threats that we're dealing with, from hypersonic missiles to theater ballistic missiles to swarming unmanned aerial systems to rockets to mortars. We've got to have that capability. And certainly last but very important, on the soldier lethality side, we are giving our soldiers, our combat soldiers who take most of the casualties, what they need, and that's an integrated visual augmentation system. It's also a new rifle, a new SAR. And these programs are setting us up for the next 40 to 50 years, so we'll have the overmatch that we need in the future.
The only thing I would add, sir, is cloud architecture. So we have to be able to capture data and be able to put it into a standard protocol to be able to pass information seamlessly between our Navy and Air Force counterparts to truly weaponize data and to move at the speed of relevance in the future.
General McConville, you did a pretty good job of articulating the needs for really all of the initiatives in your discussion. Noteworthy to me is the fact that when you look at the lower priorities that have been outlined, still needs, but down on the priority list, I see soldier lethality, 400% increase. That's the request. But for your long-range precision fires, a 4% increase. So help me understand the request for increases versus the prioritized list that you've outlined here today. I know there's a good answer for it. It's just that I'm looking at the math and thinking, man, there's something not right here.
But one of our most transformational programs within the soldier lethality portfolio is the integrated visual augmentation system, which is going to fundamentally change the way our soldiers operate. The other thing is, as we talked about working with small businesses and working with non-traditional defense partners and going ahead and working this new acquisition process. This thing is moving very, very quickly, and it's transformational in nature for our soldiers. That's why you're seeing the large increase investment in this portfolio, because it's happening very, very quickly.
It's a 26% increase year over year for the entire modernization effort, sir. But to your point about some portfolios moving faster than the other, that's largely the maturity of the technology and how quickly we can integrate it into a soldier or a formation.
Thank you. Go Army.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you both for being with us. Mr. Secretary, I have some questions about the Chinook Block 2 upgrade, which the committee talked about at length last year. In 2017, General Milley determined that the Block 2 was necessary to fill critical capability gaps, such as moving more people, more material, heavier vehicles around the battlefield. And since that time, Congress has been supportive of the program. Yet you decided to continue to delay the program, even though both the House and the Senate included funding and report language in fiscal year 2020, which was intended to keep the program on schedule. Can you tell me the plan for the Block 2 upgrade of the Chinook helicopter and why the program can continue to be delayed without loss of capability of the warfighter?
Yes, sir. So the aviation portfolio, we're bringing in 2 new platforms into the entire fleet, the Future Attack Reconnaissance as well as the Long-Range Assault platform. When looking at the determination of the overall health of the aviation portfolio, the Chinook is on average about 8 to 10 years old. It has north of 20 years left on the life cycle for that platform. Over the course of the last 2 years, Army leadership has worked to develop additional foreign military sales to the United Kingdom, the UAE, as well as the Afghan National Security Forces to keep the line warm till FY26 and to be able to keep flexibility in the out years. We're also procuring G models for our Army Special Operations Aviation platform. So we believe we have flexibility in the out years as well as a health of the youngest helicopter in the formation.
I also wanted to ask about the Army National Guard Humvee modernization program. That's had an immediate positive impact on readiness in the Army National Guard units, including the Guard in the state of Washington. However, there's a significant shortfall that remains. More than half of the National Guard Humvees currently are beyond their expected useful lives. The Army didn't request funding for the program, rather Congress has added funding, about $100 million in the past several years to ensure the program's success. Recently, the $100 million appropriated in fiscal year 2020 was part of the funding reprogrammed to build the border wall. Can you describe the benefit provided to the Army via the Army National Guard Humvee modernization program, and why doesn't the Army request funding in the budget for it?
Yes, sir. Program has performed well, working anti-lock brakes, reconfiguring the ambulances, the Humvee ambulances. Right now, Dr. Jetty and General Murray are conducting a vehicle study for the entire portfolio, wheeled portfolio for the Army. We have about 50,000 Humvees in the portfolio, and the program record for JLTVs over 49,000. There's like 1,000 on the program record for the infantry fighting vehicle. We just need to make sure that we're right-sizing what vehicles we have in the formation. So we're taking a hard look at that. It'll be reflected in the investments of all of those programs that I mentioned, and we should be able to report that out to Congress in the near future.
I just had one other quick question. I'm very interested in the continuation and expansion of the cyber mission assurance team concept in the Army and Air National Guard. I think it's helpful to address these cyber vulnerabilities. General, can I just get your thought on the CMAT concept? Are there cyber vulnerabilities faced by the Army that can be addressed through this program?
Well, as you know, Congressman, we got tremendous talent in the Guard and Reserve that does cyber. We're doing a lot of innovative programs on that. One of the biggest things that we're looking on talent management is, first of all, how we bring these folks in, how we keep them. There's tremendous opportunities in the Guard and the Reserve because there's civilian jobs to bring them together and work those type things. So I think there's possibilities in that area, but I'm a firm believer in a talent management system where we can recognize those with these cyber capabilities so we give them the right place at the right time.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, both of you. We talked about the Bradley replacement. You gave us briefly some lessons learned. Have we already, because what we've created is an interesting thing, and I'm really excited about it, is speed and accuracy is what we're trying to do in procurement. And that's interesting and it's challenging. When you look at the history of the military, it's very challenging. You learn some stuff on the Bradley. Have you applied it to anything else you're working on? It's going to be a learning process no matter what you do, because a lot of things are going to be new. And but the most important thing is to apply the learning process to the next project. And I think something my colleague to the right was thinking about when he was asking his questions, there's an awful lot here. Are you thinking to make sure that it's not all going to come drop on our plate the same year? And we have to fund all that as a completion project? Because there's a lot here. And are you thinking in terms of phasing it as it comes to us to fund? Because I would hate to think that all those things came to fruition in 1 year. It'd be pretty tough for us to be able to finance it.
Yes, Congressman, you're kind of referring to a potential bow wave of capability that could land. Obviously, it would be a good problem to have, but ultimately, what we're looking at is if a flat fiscal environment, would that force us into some first major decisions of flattening in strength, or do you get a budgetary increase? So the balance sheet, yes, we'll look very hard at that. This is where Dr. Jetty and General Murray will then turn to the chief and I and make recommendations. Do you cycle them in based off of the priorities, and then would you tier them into certain units over time? There's a lot of that work underway now, but that's an environment that we'll probably face in the 23-24 timeframe.
One of the things that we're seeing with even some of our older combat systems, you get to a certain point, you're going to have to recapitalize them. And really, when you start recapitalizing, you almost take them down to the bare bones, and you almost spend just as much money as if you had to purchase a new system. So the intent will be, as the new systems get ready, we will have to divest of all systems, of the older systems. And that's what we're trying to work our way through right now.
And while I still have some time, tell us about the new night vision capability.
Well, the night vision capability, which as you know, Congressman, is the integrated visual augmentation system. And the difference with that is not only improving the night vision capability, which is the track we were on. We were taking our night vision systems, which started out with a PVS-5, and then we went to a PVS-6, which gave us better night capability, and then we integrated a thermal capability and a night vision system together. And then, but what the difference with this is we're going to be able to bring in the ability to train in virtual reality in these systems. So the future will be when our soldiers go to a target, they'll be able to actually train the mission in virtual reality, do it 50 times, flick a switch, go off and do the mission, and they will have night vision capability, thermal capability, and also be able to see the type of information they need for the mission.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Obviously, training is a hugely important part of what makes our military the best in the world. I'd like to understand, or if you can actually help me understand, this next generation training system under the STE, the synthetic training environment. If you can describe the program briefly, why it's important, and you know, does it work? Just help me understand it.
Yeah, if I could take that, Congressman, you know, we always have a word, the synthetic training environment. What that allows us to do is really to conduct deep practice before we actually go ahead, or rehearsals before we actually have to go do it on the combat battlefield. And so these systems that we have today that are coming on board, these trainers are not, back in the day we used broomsticks. You know, soldiers during World War II didn't have weapons, so they ran around with broomsticks. These simulators, these rehearsal platforms, these virtual reality capabilities are cutting edge, and we can put our soldiers or our pilots or our artillerymen into situations where they get an opportunity to rehearse a mission 50 times before they actually have to go out there and do it in combat and do it with live ammunition. I think it's extremely important.
In general, so they're, correct me if I'm wrong, so are they in essence training with actual, for example, what it's gonna look like there, and whether it's buildings, fields, whatever it may be?
Absolutely, and you know, the system that I was talking to Congressman Carter about is you will be in that. In fact, the Secretary and I have actually done it and gone through a virtual reality shooting house with a scenario that we set up, and it is as real as you can get, and you can get all the training that you need, plus you have the ability to see what soldiers are doing during the actual rehearsal, and then you come back and do a very good after-action review and get lessons learned and go back and do it again.
If I may follow up on that, Mr. Chairman. So my understanding is that, what is it, $33 million? I guess, is that the part of the unfunded request, I believe?
I think that was on the UFOR. That was actually on the UFOR, yes.
So those funds would be for what? To expand, or what, to do what? I mean,
Well, those funds were for prototyping. One was on the Miles system, which we used to work our way through, you know, actual combat. So when people are shooting laser type things at each other, but it's the ability to conduct training exercises without actually using live bullets. The other one is on the virtual trainers that I talked about. You know, to go ahead and to begin the development of those trainers that our soldiers will use for rehearsals, whether it's fire or driving or those type.
is that an effect? So it's an effective way to train folks?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a lot cheaper way too. It's a lot less expensive than actually doing it with the real system.
Cheaper and potentially even more effective, because you're actually able to be in theater almost, right?
That's right. That's right. You can do it at home station, and you know, a lot of people don't have the, you know, if you're in the National Guard, your reserves, and you have, you know, you're in an armory or something like that, and or you have access to that training, you get a chance before you actually go out and do it. So I think it's valuable.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, you had a memo recently that became public in which you expressed your concerns regarding the transfer of the Army's medical research to the Defense Health Agency while they were undergoing reorganization at the military treatment facilities. I too have some concerns. Can you share with us what your specific concerns are with the transferring Army medical research to the Defense Health Agency?
Yes, Congressman. This whole process is like a massive merger where we are divesting assets to the Defense Health Agency. And ultimately what it comes down to is how do you break apart the readiness piece of medicine to the home station. And understanding the operating model of how the Defense Health Agency is going to work. How do they budget? How do we recruit people and develop professional career tracks and recruit and retain our personnel? It is not altogether clear how it works. And so ultimately I reached out to my colleague, Deputy Secretary Norquist, and told him that the pacing of the changeover was of concern, as well as the moving the Medical Research and Development Command to Defense Health Agency, MRDC, who's been instrumental in the work that we're doing to combat COVID-19 in particular. So I had just put in the request to slow the pacing of this merger until we had greater fidelity of just how all of it's going to work. Anything you want to add, Chief?
Yes, please.
I was just going to add that the Army's a people business. Our soldiers, families, and civilians, they depend on those medical treatment facilities. We have a sacred obligation to provide them quality health care, and we just want to make sure we're able to do that. And this is a very important endeavor, and we just want to make sure that we can take care of our people while it's going on.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and as I shared with you, I too have some concerns, and I brought those up when we were talking to the different military service health sectors and that on there. So do you know if you're thinking of asking Congress for a delay in this transfer at all?
No, Congressman, we're trying to work it internally. When Matt Donovan was the acting, I know he went up through against confirmation today, but we've been working with him about these very specific challenges. In many cases, our installations are in some very rural locations around the country, and how are we going to be in a position to ask our soldiers and their families to go get health care on the local economy, which may not be in a position to absorb thousands of people. So, for an example, how do you work through these relationships to ensure that we can work together and get the support that they need? In many cases, these local communities rely on us.
Right. Well, I have a lot of concerns about the way that this is moving forward, and from medical doctor training to what you said about rural communities, and to tell me that you can, there won't be any change in prescriptions because we can do it over the mail is not an answer. You mentioned COVID-19. The Army has suspended travel for soldiers and families from South Korea over the weekend because of the outbreak of COVID-19 in the country. Can you give us an update on where you are and what U.S. Forces is telling soldiers and families? And then I think what's been on a lot of our minds, and whether it's in the state or looking at the DoD family, do you have the kits that you need to even find out what's going on?
Ma'am, first with your question with respect to the PCS decision on Friday that we made, that was a 60-day delay to the PCS decisions, and what we is to see, will the flu season burn out? Will this actually reduce our risk? We don't know, but we want to buy some time. So we made this decision Friday night because we've got thousands of people moving to these locations all the time. So we saw the president put the guidance out about South Korea and Italy in particular. We followed suit. With respect to test kits, the Army's been organized for about the last month against 3 lines of effort, which we prevent, detect, and treat. So on the prevent standpoint, we got General Martin, the vice chief, every day does a meeting and looks at where every soldier, civil servant, and family member is moving around the earth. And we're looking at risk-based decisions about TDY, PCS, all of these related decisions. The Medical Research and Development Command is working with the CDC and NIH on vaccines. We're testing mice right now on one of our own solutions. So a lot of great work going there. Many of our people are former colleagues and proteges of Anthony Fauci and Dr. Redfield at CDC, so wonderful relationships there, and folks that have worked together for decades.
Getting back to the kits, if I may.
I was going to get there, ma'am, on the kits.
Okay, because you can't prevent if you haven't detected.
I was going to get to detect. On the detect line of effort, 9 of the Army labs are validated to build the test kits. We put in a request for more funding so we can open up our capacity to produce thousands a day. We're working through that funding right now, and we, from the supplemental that was granted by Congress last week.
In South Korea, do you have kits, was the more specific question I had.
We're buying those, I believe General Abrams is buying those off of the local economy, as well as has some on hand as well.
And you can get the lab results how soon?
I don't know the answer to that.
Would you get back to us with that? Because
Yes, ma'am.
some places are having to send them, other places are being able to do it in.
That's one of the things, ma'am, we're working on is we've got these master testers that have done it for other type of diseases or viruses, and we need to ramp that up. It was like 50 or 60 a day. We got to get up to thousands so we can actually get this at the industrial
And so
size.
I would assume as part of prevent, you're telling others stationed in Germany to stay home, use abundance of precaution, not
Yep.
be moving around a lot?
We've been putting these protocols in place, and they're developing additional CONOPS as the risk continues to grow.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rogers.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. After 2 decades of focusing on counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, the Army needs to refocus on preparations to oppose a near-peer adversary. The 2018 National Defense Strategy emphasizes the threats posed by, quote, great powers, and and specifically highlights Russia and China as the greatest threats to our interests. China, naturally at the forefront of many of our minds, whether it's their military modernization and mobilization, economic pressure on countries in the region, or continuing to militarize the South China Sea. It's clear that they seek to increase their influence in the region and indeed the world. Similarly, Russia continues to expand its global influence, conducting mass misinformation campaigns, inserting itself into the domestic policies of foreign nations. I understand one of the Army's top priorities in the upcoming fiscal year is improving its tactical readiness when it comes to a near-peer adversary, which will be critical after 2 decades of fighting in the Middle East. When it comes to training, from the team and squad level all the way to brigade and higher, how are you preparing for potential combat or opposition against a near-peer adversary like China or Russia? Are there any specific training-related areas in which we could improve upon to ensure we're ready for this kind of a world? Lastly, is there anything we as a committee can do to help you achieve maximum tactical readiness levels?
If I could, Congressman, again, we're going through a major change for a lot of our officers, NCOs, as you said, that they've been prosecuting wars of what we would call irregular warfare, counterterrorism, counterinsurgencies, and we're going back to what many of us grew up with when we came in the Army in the 80s, which was really large-scale ground combat type operations, although the difference now is we believe we will be contested in every single domain. Not only will we have large formations that we'll have to fight of very advanced equipment, and we start talking about armored type vehicles, we're talking about artillery, mass type artillery. We're also going to be contested from the air. You know, the last time we lost an American soldier from the air was April 15th, 1953. And that's why some of our requests, we're starting to develop a mobile short-range artillery capability. We're going to be contested on the sea, which we're going to have to think our way through how that works. Then also contested in space and contested in cyber. So a lot of, we're hardening a lot of our communications. We're making sure that we have the ability to use the systems that may be affected from those areas. And so when we go out to the National Training Center, we go to the Joint Readiness Center, we're taking these, our threat forces exercise these capabilities, and then we're training our soldiers and our officers and units how to fight against them.
Secretary?
Having the maxed out number of CTC rotations with these change scenarios is greatly enhancing their ability. Those repetitions are key. If you look at, whenever I talk with General McConville or the other 4-stars, many of them had 8 or 9 repetitions at the CTC rotations before they hit the Burma and Iraq or the invasion of Afghanistan. So when you get repetitions of these large collective exercises, that's really what makes the change. But the investments that have been made at the CTCs has made a dramatic difference in fighting against real scenarios for near-peer competitors.
Thank you. Yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. My district is home to Fort Huachuca. The fort is home to more than 1,000 service members and their families and has about 1,100 housing units. More than 6,000 enlisted individuals serve at Fort Huachuca. Family readiness is essential to our military's mission readiness. The military family's ability to maintain a stable home front is imperative for our troops to keep their eyes on the mission. Child care is a necessary tool essential to a military family's quality of life. Once again, the Army is not investing funds in childcare activities. So I have 3 questions about that. Could you please give the committee a justification for the lack of attention to these vital programs? How is that possibly going to help with retention and quality of life? And what is the Army budgeting for these programs in future years? As a source of stress for military families, I would think this would be an easy problem to attack.
Congressman, we've grown the budget over the last couple of years. We brought down the backlog from over 7,000 down to just over 3,000 for the active uniformed personnel. Secretary Esper just released the Department of Defense-wide memorandum to prioritize military families first and availability for the child care opportunities that exist on the installations. But clearly we need to do more, and we're developing a plan to how do we get to buy down this whole, or burn down this whole backlog, and to get it done in the next 2 to 3 years. General McConville has a request also on his UFOR list for additional locations for some of the more.
Mr. Secretary, I'm having a very
Yes, sir.
difficult time hearing you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, if you could continue where you referenced the general was going to have remarks.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm not interrupting. I just couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. General McConnell also has a request on his UFOR list as well for additional.
Unfunded.
On the unfunded, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. I do want to make sure I heard that.
For three additional CDCs, I believe it's two in Hawaii and one in at Fort Wainwright, right?
That is correct. There's also the ability to there's some other money in there, and like Congressman, you said, is we need to do more on that. And here's why. 88% of our sergeants have families. And we have a lot of dual families, and the Secretary and I have talked about this, and I think it's $190 million on my unfunded requirement list. We need to work with the committee to make sure we can get that funded. We got about 4,000 folks on the waiting list, and they should be waiting, and we just need to get after that, and I hope we can work with the committee to do better on that. We need to do better on that in the future.
Well, I can't stress it enough. My district in Arizona is largely a military district. So we have Fort Huachuca Army base, but we also have an Air Force base, Davis-Monthan, and then 5 of the major defense contractors are in Tucson. So it's a huge segment of our economy, but also because of our proximity to the border, it's really, really important to maintain those bases and make sure they've got the resources that they need. So thank you for your attention to that. I yield back.
I'd like to follow up on the gentlewoman's questions as well as the answers from the panel. First of all, Mr. Secretary, you said we have grown the budget for childcare over the last several years, and the numbers would prove you correct. In fiscal year 19, the Army had $326.6 million for childcare program. In fiscal year 20, our current year, it is $371.5 million. I would point out that's because we added the money. I would point out that the request for the Army for 21 is a reduction of $36.8 million from current year levels. Your request for this year is $334.7 million. That is a cut in funding for child care of 36.8. I would note, and you are correct, Mr. Secretary, that you have reduced the backlog. The backlog figures from the Department of the Army for fiscal year 19 were 5,561 children. Those are people. The backlog for the current year is estimated to be, it is not done, 5,350. So there's a reduction of 211 people. It is interesting that despite the fact that you have asked to cut the budget for child care by $36.8 million, and you estimate you will have 900 more people in the United States Army next year, that your estimate for backlog for child care is exactly the same number for this year, so you are making no progress. The second point I would make, as far as budgeting, we received notice from the Department of the Army this past week that relative to certain procurement programs, and the budget was just introduced to the Congress in the second week of February, that there are $145.4 million of assets identified that are over budget that will now not be required. That is a huge amount of money that now is not going to be needed, but was requested in the budget submission a month ago. But we cut daycare. I don't know who is doing the budgeting here. And I would also point out, and you are correct in your testimony, there are 2 unfunded requests for additional money for daycare. I want to be fair with you. One is for $171 million. The other is for $115 million. I would point out they're unfunded. That means you didn't ask for them in this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, as you know, when we talk about workforce, the U.S. workforce and our ability to stay competitive from a technological environment is important. Looking at present and future threats, I think cyber, hypersonics, and directed energy are at the forefront of those changes. Specifically, what is the Army doing to develop military and civilian workforce in those areas?
General McConville started a talent management effort when he was the G1 about 5 years ago, and we've matured over time with our ability to recruit and retain really unique skill sets like you mentioned with the STEM talent. We've also enhanced our relationships with academia and business and using direct hire authorities to find individuals like data scientists that have very unique capabilities and educational experiences in particular. This is a challenge with a lot of opportunity with 3.5% unemployment. We've worked this very hard even at our level of getting involved in personally recruiting people to join the Army, but it's been a difficult challenge, not only getting them but retaining them. Just the compensation is just very competitive.
What more can we do? What more needs to be done at your level and at our level to address the workforce
Some of the things
challenges?
we're looking at is on the compensation side. You know, we'll never really achieve Silicon Valley kind of money, but there are ways that we can compensate people differently. Different hiring authorities related to that. So we may come back to that next year, but right now we've developed these platforms to recruit people, and we brought them into ASALT and Futures Command like organizations to help us with the development of weapon systems in particular. We've been able to hire some very talented civil servants to help us with our cloud efforts. It may require a change with how we compensate people in the future.
Anything to offer, General?
I just think that we have some very highly talented people that want to come into the Army, especially young people today. They seem to be motivated by purpose, being part of a team, and that's what we offer them, and they can do things that they can't do anywhere else. And I've seen some amazing people want to join the Army, both as civilians and the military, so we're very proud of this service.
Another question, gentlemen, on space operations. Can you talk to me a little bit about the Army's space forces that are employed, and how do you anticipate them working and integrating with the Space Force in the future?
Well, sorry, I defer to the chief as well here, but we're going through the process of the joint warfighting concept, which is largely driven in the tank with the chiefs. And that's how will this change the operating model of the entire Department of Defense? Well, what you'll see over the next couple of years is the divestiture of some space assets from the Army, but ultimately it's finding where is that line of demarcation between Army responsibilities and the Space Force, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. So a lot of that will unfold over the next 24 months. But we've done we made a lot of investments with low Earth orbit, satellite architecture in particular. This is a key capability that we're going to need to have that very resilient comms as well as position navigation and timing, so that we can have a unique capability for targeting at lower echelons. The speed of combat is continually getting tougher, and to have that capability at lower echelons to be able to help improve our targeting will be necessary. We're the largest consumer of space in the Department of Defense. Chief?
No, I absolutely agree with what the Secretary said, is we use space. I mean, almost every single vehicle has something that's derived from space, whether it's global positioning, satellite, or it's a long-range communication, or it's early warning. So we've got to keep those mechanisms in place, and we will work with the Space Force. We do some things with satellites that probably will go to the Space Force. We don't need to be actually operating in space, but we need to keep the capabilities on the ground that we draw from space, and they will be with our soldiers that are forward in the battlefield. So we're working that out right now.
Appreciate it, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Appreciate your service to our country. As you know, the Synthetic Training Environment Cross-Functional Team in my state of Florida is working to modernize training. Can you talk about the timeline for incorporating some of the things the Army is developing out of Orlando and into the force? I think Congressman Diaz-Balart had a similar question.
And one of the things that Congressman, we did talk about was an integrated visual augmentation system, which we think is the most transformational system we have going. That came together because of the synthetic training environment team, worked with the soldier lethality team, and this is what made that whole program transformational, the fact that soldiers will be able to train on missions in virtual reality before they actually get to do that. And one of the things that the synthetic training environment is developing is what we call one world terrain. So you can go anywhere in the world eventually and be able to rehearse and practice on that terrain. And so, we talked a little about this before, that the capability of training today in simulation is unbelievable, whether it's, flying an aircraft, or it's driving vehicles, or it's shooting weapon systems. We can do a lot faster, we can do a lot quicker, and we can do multiple rehearsals without expending all the money that you would do it if you were actually shooting live ammunition.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add, sir?
Sir, looking at FY22 for fielding of that capability, to the point that the chief made, is that it'll spiral additional applications over time, day-night sites, as well as pumping synthetic training scenarios like room clearing and others, as well as the maps. So once the actual goggle is fielded over time, more applications can be squirted in there because it has an open system architecture.
Great, thank you. Can you provide an update on the Army's effort to develop a COVID-19 vaccine? And are you working in coordination with any outside organizations like National Institute of Health, American universities, or foreign governments?
Yes, sir. We met with our experts. We meet with them every week. Depends on the day. We met with them last night. Right now, we are developing additional test kits, and we're looking at increasing the capacity of our test kits to thousands a day. We're working within the Vice President's task force to request additional funding over the course of the next couple days. With respect to the vaccine, the Army has a vaccine that it is testing on mice right now, and we believe we're less than a couple months away from starting to test human specimens. There's about 4 or 5 total that are on different tracks. This is all being driven by CDC. Our scientists in particular, our lead scientists, are protégés of Dr. Fauci. They have wonderful relationships, all work together over decades. We have, in particular, Dr. Majari, who's one of 3 people on the earth that's ever published on coronavirus. He works for us in Army Medical Research Development Command, and he's the point man on this. He was a key figure in the Zika vaccine. So we feel very confident in our people. We just need to keep pushing the resources to them. But they're working really hard, and we're going to have options here very soon.
Thank you for that. How many testing kits do you have available? How many testing sites are available for Army personnel? And do spouses and dependents have access to testing, particularly overseas?
So we have 9 validated labs that can build test kits.
Right.
Right now, the quantities are very low, 50, 60 a day. We're moving the funding, and they can get to thousands a day once we get the funding in place and start cranking this through. So it is a matter of weeks where we'll be getting this going. We just got to get the funding in place. But we are confident in our team's ability to start cranking more capacity. With respect to the quantities that are available to soldiers and their families around the globe, I'd have to get back to you on the specifics of that, sir.
Mr. Chris, if you deal.
Of course.
You said, sir, 50 or 60 kits a day being manufactured. Is that total, or is that 50 or 60 kits per day per night?
I'll get you a paper, Congressman. I believe that's per lab, so we'll get you the specifics.
And then, so you said you were getting money from the supplemental for tests?
We're looking for additional funding from internally to the executive
Internally,
branch. Yes,
because there's no DOD language in the supplemental.
That's right. So we'd have to go to either HHS or other entities within the Department of Defense. We're working that internally right now.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, of course. So you mentioned about the funding. What's the issue there? You don't have the money?
The MRDC
Please.
is, I'm sorry, sir. The MRDC is on
I was trying to be polite. I'm sorry.
MRDC is on a reimbursable model.
Yes, sir.
So CDC or NIH and other government entity would turn to them and say, do you have the scientific capability here to do the work?
Mhm.
In this case, we do. So, but we're moving to a different model where it'll be on a rate boards where we'd have budgets that you could lay into it. But the current operating model of how we would do business is on a reimbursable basis. So someone has to come with the funding to say, can you do this? We are capable of doing this. We're working this out internally to turn on additional funding.
So who would be the one who would come to you with the money?
CDC, NIH, other entities within the U.S. government.
Have you sought it out?
Yes, sir.
How's it look?
I'd probably tell you here in a couple of days, sir.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good seeing y'all again. Can I ask you a little bit on the Army's night core review that have led to reduction or elimination of 240 existing programs? And ask you, I think in FY20, y'all proposed to eliminate or delay or cancel 186 programs. And Congress pretty much supported what y'all did. FY21, you're again proposing to reduce or eliminate an additional 80 programs, which will shift another $2.4 billion this year and $13.5 billion across the 5-year program. Is this going to be an annual review that y'all going to be doing, or give us a little bit more? Again, I'm one of those big believers in getting rid of any duplication, elimination of anything that's been done or has been, so I appreciate this type of work, but give us a little bit more of your thought process on this.
Yes, sir. The Army's balance sheet of $178 billion, if we get this budget through, is over half of it, north of 60% of it is people and operations and maintenance. So we're fixed with the number of dollars we have to modernize the force, because you got almost 90,000 people deployed worldwide. So readiness is our number one priority. We have to continue to grow the force because we have about a 1-to-1 dwell between boots on the ground and deployments and dwell time boots on the ground. So we need more people to meet global demand and not wear people out. So when you look at the modernization effort, the research, development, acquisition dollars, we're fixed. We have to divest if we want to continue to modernize our formation. So we've made some very hard choices over the last 24 months in particular, and I think more of that will come in the future. But to the points that we've had in the discussion today, it's going to get much harder. And the divestiture of systems that have served the nation very well for 40, 50 years are going to come to an end as long as we have weapon systems that go through the development process that have the maturity. So some very difficult decisions are in front of us.
Is this your idea? How did this reviews come about?
I think it's really the four of us, Secretary Esper, General Milley, General McConville, and I. We looked at just the realities we face. We had to meet national objectives. We had to have units that could deploy and be ready to go. But we wanted to modernize the force. We knew we had to do this. So, the four of us came together, took the blood oath, and we've taken this on. And that's why General McConville and I have maintained the same priorities, just putting greater emphasis with people, and we're going to pursue this for as long as we're in the seat.
Well, I have to congratulate you, Mr. Carter. If this kind of reminds me of the John Sharp performance review that we went over the state government in Texas, and they did all this, and it saved the state of Texas billions of dollars. So this kind of reminds me of what we did in Texas. So just want, I know you spent a little bit of time in Texas also, but I just have to say that I really appreciate this type of exercise that y'all doing. I do. Can I ask you one last question quickly? Your folks in San Antonio are going to start doing some work with hospitals on the border. We changed the language to allow them to do that in the NDAA. And I think sometime in June, I think some of your folks will be going down there at the border. That works out for areas that don't have Trauma 1, Tier 1, Trouble 1. That helps the community, but at the same time, it helps your men and women to give them that type of training. So I highly encourage you that you continue doing that, not only for the border, but other parts of the country. And I would ask you, and you know, as you do that training, that is beneficial not only for areas that don't have, I think our area is about a Tier 3 and not a Tier 1 like in San Antonio, that if you have any surplus equipment or anything that you can help some of those communities that don't have the resources, ask you to look at that possibility. But it's a win-win situation for communities that don't have that type of capacity, and then your men and women, so when they go abroad, will have that training there. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Yes, sir. We'll look at that very closely. As we mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of a merger inside the department with the Defense Health Agency. So we'll have to see what the implications are, whether or not we have the authorities. Depends upon the organization in question. But this is great training. It's great opportunities for us to work with local communities, and those sorts of things we continue to pursue all over the country.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing a innovative, and I'm talking not only about this project, but I'm talking about the I'll call it a performance review evaluation and getting rid of any duplication and unnecessary programs on that. Thank you, both of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary and General, thank you very much for being here. You know, Mr. Secretary, every time we have a chance to talk, we talk about the Rock Island Arsenal, and we're very proud of the Advanced Manufacturing Center that we have there. Really appreciate when you visited there with, along with me and Senator Durbin. With that in mind, you released an advanced manufacturing policy, and so I want to ask if you can elaborate how you see our Center of Advanced Manufacturing Center of Excellence supporting your strategy moving forward.
This is a capability that we need to have from an expeditionary standpoint. So as much as having the technology to be able to produce parts, is that they're going to have to help us figure out how to make it expeditionary in nature. So you can put these 3D printing machines in a Connex and forward deploy it with a formation, because that's where you'll be able to, you know, quickly get a part produced, put it into a combat vehicle or a helicopter so they can get it back up and keep those OR rates very high. So this is a very strategic priority of ours. The challenge that we think we're going to face with additive manufacturing, we're working hard with industry, because this is a place where intellectual property with a part is something where we have general purpose rights on everything, but it's how we rate this into contracts so that over time we can produce them. We see, you know, challenges ahead. Is going to take a lot of communication, in particular. But this is something that we would want to have in all of our platforms in the future, along with predictive maintenance as well, so we can make those right calls before the part breaks while you're in the middle of an operation.
General?
I absolutely agree, Congresswoman. This is transformational for how we do logistics in the field. Rather than carrying around, you know, thousands of parts, if we can make them, and you know, it right. Keeps kids off the roads. They don't have to drive trucks. It saves money. You know, we never quite get right which part we may need, so we have to carry them all, and it can take weeks to get them. So I think this is the future.
So how can the center help with establishing a database of spare parts?
Well, I think the way it can help, and the Secretary mentioned that, is, you know, as we contract in the future, you can probably see this in the contract, hey, we want to be able to manufacture so much of these parts. And it may not be all of them, because we'll still, you know, it will still have a logistics chain, but we're going to have to get a little more finesse in how we can get the intellectual capital to do these type of things, because that's how industry makes money. They make money on the logistics and the sustainment. That's going to be all part of the deal as we move in the future.
And with the older platforms, Congresswoman, if we're going to have to get really college students to go to graduate engineering programs so that we can convert these old drawings into digital drawings, because that's how you perfect the tensile strength. So when you reproduce it, it's within the percentage of being 100% accurate to the drawing that was written 30, 40 years ago. So we're going to have a lot of these platforms in the formation for a long time. So it's perfecting that. We have relationships with Northwestern University, with Wichita State and others around the country, and they're helping us looking at these old drawings of these weapon systems, turning them into digital drawings so you can, a machine can produce the part in real time.
So are you looking at the center that we have at the Arsenal to help with, be the test bed for new concepts in advanced and additive manufacturing that can help fulfill the strategy?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. General, anything else to add?
No, I just think it's really important transformational work. It's what we're going to be doing in the future, and that's going to be like a center of excellence. So, and we need to move in the future. We need to get in the information age, and that's what it's all about.
Very good. Mr. Secretary, we'd love to have you back there. Come visit us again.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, the Army Futures Command was created about 18 months ago, and each command is different. Space Force was in last week and said that they aim to be agile. I would note after 18 months, there's 404 people connected with the Army Futures Command, and in your budget request for 21, you asked for an additional 150 people. That's a 37% increase in personnel. Could you explain that increase?
Sir, the Army Futures Command's about, you're talking about just the headquarters element? Because there's 36,000 people in Army Futures Command. They have the lab networks, they have Futures and Concepts Division, cross-functional teams. With respect to the, I believe the 100, you said 100.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, sir, I'm looking right into the, sorry, can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Right to your lips.
Sir, the 100, you said 100, how many again? I'm sorry?
We have a request for 150 new FTEs for the Army's Futures Command.
Yeah, so Army Futures Command is about 36,000 people. It has the Futures and Concepts Division, Combat Development, Combat Systems. It has the cross-functional teams. What? And so if you're referring directly to the headquarters element in Texas, is that?
If I could back you up, you're asking for the headquarters.
Yeah, I thought you said Futures Command was only 400 people. I'm sorry.
For the headquarters?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll correct you. My understanding, there's 404 people at the headquarters for Army Futures Command.
And we wanted it to be around
Request for an
500.
additional 150 people.
And we wanted it to be around 500 people. That was the intent from its inception, sir.
Why do you need those people?
They're managing an organization of about 36,000 people, so it's the support that General Murray needs to run his command, sir.
Okay, at this point, the committee knows you want 150 more people. We have no justification as to what each of those individuals are going to be doing and why they are required to help manage 36,000 other people. So if you could supply that for the committee, I'd appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir.
On the good news front, the Army's estimated end strength for this current year is 485,000. It would also appear that there then would be a shortfall of about $400 million to pay for that increase, and I think it's terrific that recruiting is going well. Could you explain to the committee how you're going to meet that shortfall?
Well, Chairman, the way we plan to meet that shortfall is the way the recruiting works over the year. It won't be for the entire year. We'll meet end strength at the end of the year. So it basically goes through cycles. It comes down and it comes back up as we bring more people in. But that's how we plan to meet the request.
So there will be savings on average to cover the 400. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is, as far as how we manage the end strength during the year, it varies during the year and tends to come down and then come up at the end as far as how do we manage
So
the...
you will not have a shortfall of $400 million?
I will have to check and take that for the record then.
Okay. There was earlier conversation about the Block 2 upgrade for the Chinook. I'd like to continue the conversation about the Chinook and plans for the Afghan Special Mission Wing. It is my understanding there are discussions about transferring older models of the Chinook to the Afghan Special Mission Wing. Is that true?
The specific mechanics of what type of platform that would get to I would defer to the commander, but I think that they've looked at options of moving that would be the Block 1 variant to the Afghan Special. Yes, that's correct.
My understanding is they'd be older models of the Chinook that would be transferred.
Be Block 1, yes, sir.
If I could ask, what's the strategy if we're drawing down? I mean, why are we going to provide a helicopter that has never, my understanding, been provided to the Afghans before? Why are we going to give it to them now?
I would defer that question to the commander in the field, but I mean, the aircraft is, the CH-47 Fox is a very good aircraft there. It's for the Special Mission Wing. I think it's the right aircraft. CH-47 is a great aircraft, and that provides the capability that they think they need. And they're working through how they're going to purchase that and make that happen, and I think it's a good recommendation.
When you say they need, are you talking about our command or the Afghans?
The Afghan, in order to give the Afghan Special Mission Wing the capability. And they would buy it
from the Army?
They would, there'll be some type of purchase agreement. I'll defer.
Foreign military financing or some relationship like that, yes, sir.
But the monies would go to the United States Army?
The platforms would go, you mean how would they cycle the funding through the department and then ultimately provide them to the Afghans, sir? Is that what you're asking?
It is my understanding that if you transfer those assets, the Afghans would have money from somewhere to pay for that, but the money would be transferred back to the United States Army.
On the sale itself?
Yes.
It would presumably go through DSCA and then ultimately to the Afghan National Security Forces, sir. You're talking about the actual transfer, the transaction?
My understanding, the Army would get the proceeds from the sale of these helicopters from the Army. Is that correct?
So the specifics to the transaction, I would get a technical expert to give you all of the specifics, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry, sir, can you hear me?
So as you testify here before us today, Mr. Secretary, you have no anticipation that there is going to be a transfer of old Chinooks to the Afghan forces?
That's the option we're looking at, sir.
You're looking at that option. So if you're looking at that option, it would also be your assumption if that option is exercised, there would be a transfer of money.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If there's that transfer of money and you're looking at that option, the conclusion of the option is the Army has more money.
If the transaction went that way, yes, sir.
They're short helicopters, they got money. Right?
Theoretically, yes,
Okay.
sir.
What's the Army's plans as you're looking at the option? What would be the Army's option as to what they're going to do with that money?
Sir, I'd have to get back to you with specifics.
I would appreciate it if you would, Mr. Secretary. I might also just ask that my impression, and I stand to be corrected here today, that the Afghans had had a very difficult time for 19 years maintaining any aircraft. The most recent ones, the helicopters they have not dealt with the Chinooks, and the General, I would absolutely agree, they're terrific aircraft. What assurance after 19 years of failure and our drawdown that they're going to be able to do this? And are we going to end up having to pay someone else to stay in Afghanistan and maintain these? Yep. If that option is exercised? Have people thought about who is going to maintain these as part of that option?
That'd be part, we would come back with the answer, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what they're trying to do is going to take money out of one pocket and put it in the other pocket, because the Afghans don't have the money to buy the helicopters in the first place, I suspect. But we'll get into that later. You know, I think I've told you the story of my favorite procurement story of all time was Kelly Johnson, who was a renowned aircraft designer at the Skunk Works. You know, he at the beginning of World War II, we were losing, and he went to a bar in El Segundo and with a couple of engineers, and with cocktail napkins, he laid out the P-38. 9 months later, it came across the assembly line. They asked him at the end of his life, how come you did it that quickly? He said, because we're going to lose the war. And today we're having a discussion about various systems that we can't seem to get to for years, you know, including the hypersonic weapon, which is obvious. But obviously, the replacement for the Bradley isn't all that technical, it seems to me. And these delays and delays and delays is remarkable to me. And now I get a memo the other day that Secretary Esper, in his former role as Secretary of the Army, approved a waiver for the use of a compound called HNS-2, an organic compound, from a prohibited source. That source was a Chinese military company. Apparently, the Army didn't realize that the manufacturers of our Abrams active protection system used the compound that nobody else could provide. Nobody else could provide it. The waiver notification indicated that the manufacturers were working on qualifying 2 non-prohibited sources, but that would take 18 to 24 months. So I thought it was kind of the ultimate irony that Kelly Johnson designed the P-38 aircraft in 9 months. I mean, not designed it, it was coming across the assembly line in 9 months. And we can't get a waiver to take away a critical resource for the Chinese military that provides protection for the Abrams tank. We got a problem, and we've got to fix this problem in our procurement process. And this gets to the, you know, my comment, and is program managers. You know, I don't know who the program manager is on the Abrams modernization program, or the program manager for the Bradley replacement, or the program manager. I know who the program manager for the hypersonic, that'd be Mike Griffin. Mike's on that full time, I think, at least that's what he tells me. So, but do we have program managers on this, or are we changing these people out too often? That's the question I've got.
With respect to the program manager for Abrams, we have a PEO, a 2-star general that falls under him, Jeff Cummings. We have, I think, we're looking at about 24, 36 months on station for these program managers. So.
Well, how come it takes 18 to 24 months to get a sign-off to take away our ordering this material from the Chinese? I mean, we shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but you think somebody could go upstairs and knock this thing out right away.
Yes, it's entirely too long, very bureaucratic, going through different entities within the Department of Defense and other government agencies.
But don't you think it's a little bit ironic that we're buying this from the Chinese military? I mean, that's, whoa. This, you know, but anyway, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
want to talk to you about Materials in Extreme Dynamic Environments Program. General McConville, about the Materials Extreme Dynamic, it's called MEDI, I believe it is, program led by the Army Research Lab and Johns Hopkins University at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Through this program, Army scientists and engineers partner with industry and academia to test and develop advanced body armor ceramic blends and innovative manufacturing techniques. This research has already paid dividends, resulting in a significant 16% reduction in the weight of body armor used in the Army's next-generation personal protective equipment system. While 16% doesn't sound like a lot, I'm told when you're jumping out of a C-130, it makes a hell of a difference. In my opinion, this program is an example of successful Army research partnership and one that directly affects our frontline troops on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the MEDI program is in the last year of funding. Are there plans to extend this program into the future? And as we work to modernize our Army, how important are Army research programs like MEDI to the advancement of new armor materials for our soldiers and equipment?
Yes, Congress, as you said, this is some incredible work that was done. It's cutting-edge technology as far as what is done for body armor. As I understand, this has reached the end of a 10-year contract, and we'll come back with some more details, but I believe they're going through a process of doing another contract. I'm not sure exactly where the details are on that.
Okay, you go back.
Mr. Womack.
Thank you. From a different vantage
Look where
point.
you're sitting. Ooh.
Kind of like this seat. Just kidding. Secretary McCarthy, I know you would think I'd be remiss if I didn't throw a West Point question into our discussion today, given the fact that everybody that sits at this dais has young men and women that they've nominated and ultimately had appointments to the U.S. Military Academy, and now having the benefit of serving on that board since 2012 and now as chair for the 4th straight year, I just want to put in a plug for the proactive nature in which our West Point leadership is approaching the modernization of the post. As you know, that's got some age on it, and it has some stressors, notably Camp Buckner, where a lot of very important and critical training takes place. We've done a very good job with, and still doing a good job with the Barracks Improvement Program, the beautiful Davis Barracks, the Academic Improvement Program. So down the road, how are we going to address, and is it going to be the intention of our Army to pay some attention to the training ground out at Camp Buckner and Camp Natural Bridge?
Congressman, we have put the initial request into this budget for the refit of the Buckner site. It'll start over, I think it's in the base budget, right? We put the request in this year on Buckner, and we're starting the process, but that is something that is way overdue.
Yeah. General McConville, you've obviously trained there. Hasn't changed much since you were there. Camp Buckner, so you probably have at least a little bit of parochial interest in that training ground, do you not?
I certainly think that it needs to be replaced, and we've had that discussion. I've talked to the superintendent. We also support the engineering facility. We need to, that also needs to get done. So those are out there, and those are we want those in the program. I know with Buckner we've talked about that. That's in the the future. I just want to give you exactly where that sits.
Sure. Well, you know, General Williams would drop me for push-ups if I didn't throw that subject out on the table. One other question. This is for General McConville. Your work as a G1 was noteworthy, and I really appreciate and admire the strategy behind the talent management piece of what we're trying to do with people. I personally think it's long overdue. But particularly in the area of the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. And I want to give you a chance here for the committee to articulate the need for a process that was conducted in January and February that was designed to better identify those officers who should be commanding at the battalion level. And a follow-up question to that is, do you sense, given what you've been through in January and February, that we could see this thing also applied to the brigade command selection process, even the sergeant's major process? So just a few random thoughts on it.
Yes, Congressman, and we took an assessment, and we started at the battalion command level, and I personally believe that battalion command is the most consequential command position in the United States Army, because they deal with our new soldiers and new officers, and based on that experience, a lot of soldiers and officers decide whether, you know, they're going to stay in the Army, get out of the Army. They're also our future leaders. We pick 435 battalion commanders. We pick about 450 colonels, not the one-to-one, but that's where our future leaders are going to come from. And we took a look at the way we were assessing these very important leaders, and we were basically looking at their evaluation reports for about 2.5 minutes during a board, and we decided that we should give them some more time. So we set up a 5-day assessment that looks at a lot of knowledge, skills, and attributes that we think they should have, and we got some good results. And we're going to look at doing the same thing both for command sergeant majors and brigade commanders. One size doesn't fit all, but these assessments, I think, are extremely important.
Yeah, thank you for your work in this particular regard, because I agree. I think it is one of the threshold, probably the threshold command that has as much of an impact on the success of our Army as about anything. And in order to get a rise out of Dutch, I'm going to end by saying, beat Navy.
Gentleman from Maryland.
That I know. I said beat Navy.
Well, you know, I'm Army caucus, so I got a white Army.
Gentlemen, there was a transfer of money from the National Guard and Reserve equipment account totaling about $1.3 billion. We won't get into the details, except for the Army Reserve, $205 million were involved, and for the Army National Guard, there was $395 million involved. That's a loss of $600 million for those accounts. Do you have any plans or thoughts as to how you will proceed in 2020, given that loss of $600 million?
Sir, we're going to have to look back and reevaluate how we're going to be able to adjust, but those were program funds that we did not program for, so we'll have to go back and look at how we could adjust to that.
I would acknowledge to you it's a congressional act, and we do it annually. Was there any anticipation by the Army that we wouldn't do it again? I mean, the money was there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually will be brief. I want to, so the Gray Eagle, what is it, MQ-1C, which is enduring component frankly, of future force structure, right, of the Army. And yet, and then I noticed that there was a report commissioned by the Army that recommended procurement of 14 aircraft per year as a minimum just to sustain the industrial base. And yet, my understanding is the Army now has, in essence, zeroed out that airplane, that drone, whatever you want to call it, for FY21. So again, if the report says that just to forget about anything else, just to keep the industrial base alive, it requires 14 aircraft, how do we then zero it out overnight?
I think that, and we've got to, I'll get you the exact details, but the way I understand it is we met our acquisition objective. We had bought all the Gray Eagles that we required to fill our organizations, and now we're starting to look at what's the future of our unmanned aerial systems that that manufacturer and others can compete for, so we keep the base going. But as we talked in the future, first of all, these aircraft have done great things for us in the environment we're in. But we are moving to great power competition where the airspace will be contested, so that's going to drive the type of aircraft that we're going to need in the future.
No, I get that, General. I'm just concerned that we don't destroy the industrial base, because again, when that report talks about 14 aircraft per year minimum to sustain the industrial base. I think that's something that we have to also look at. So I'd be interested to kind of follow up on how that's going to look. How do we make sure that we don't jeopardize the possibility, you know, some of those that are providing these amazing platforms, that we don't jeopardize them. So I'd like to follow up with you on that.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The next question I would have is on the dynamic force employment. The Army has requested
588, sir.
$88 million for the force. And the question I have is about the justification that has been submitted. I would, again, in all fairness, indicate that we do have 4 pieces of paper from the Department of the Army justifying $588 million. I would point out that for $458 million, we have 1 piece of paper with 3 sentences. The 3 sentences are repeated on each of the other 3 sheets in an effort to find out more detail. Our committee has requested information about these forces, how they'll be deployed, how long the deployments will be, how large of the contingencies, and other details, recognizing that you want some flexibility for this force. And to date, we've received no information. So you might, if you could, Mr. Secretary, explain to me why the details have been lacking and why your office has not responded to our request for information.
Sir, well, we'll get the G3 up here to explain.
When will you do that, Mr. Secretary?
As soon as possible, sir, as soon as you're ready. We'll bring them up here.
Okay.
That's unexcusable. We should get you the information. So.
Do you have anything? Ms. McComb?
I'm going to go back to our discussion earlier about the merger of the healthcare programs. 171 doctors on average graduate every year from our military schools. We graduate highly proficient nurses, masters, dentists. And of the 171 doctors that graduate, we're still short in the military 15 to 18%. And that's with the 7-year enlistment. That's a great opportunity to get your medical school paid for. Many of us in this room probably don't even know it, but our doctors, one of my doctors, my gynecologist, was an Army doctor. That's how a poor kid from South St. Paul was able to go to school. We have a shortage of physicians and doctors in this country. And so, Mr. Chair, I think we need to work with the staff to really figure out if we know where this is heading. Because if this isn't done right, we're heading to compound a physician, nurse, and possibly even a dental shortage in this country. Not only for ourselves, but for our military men and women. And, you know, you don't know when you're going to get called in to, you know, fight the battle. And these doctors and nurses and techs and radiologists and everybody else that comes with, the finest in the world, do some of the most advanced healthcare in the world. They're working with military families and soldiers, airmen, and Marines and their families, keeping their skills fresh and learning all the time to be better healthcare professionals. And I am very concerned that we are not thinking this out thoughtfully enough about what we're doing, not only to the research side, but the healthcare delivery side. And if we don't get this right, it will mean less people either, you know, re-upping to stay in the military service part of it, the military corps, or families walking with their feet if there's a shortage of pediatricians and gynecologists, which are the 2 that I've seen that they really want to scale down. And what that signals to women that we are trying to keep and retain and move through rank and do the important jobs in the military is, we don't care about your health care. Now, I know that's not what you gentlemen are about, but that's what I'm becoming very, very concerned about. So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, you know, I'm ready to slow this down and do a deep dive into some research, because I think this has repercussions that we don't even realize, not only in military healthcare, but in civilian healthcare. And I'm very concerned about it. I'm not saying we can't do it, but all the articles I'm reading, everybody's like, nobody's proved that this isn't going to cause a shortage. And so that, with Mr. Chair, we're going to have to, you know, based on the previous hearing, and you were at a very important meeting while that was taking place, I've become more alarmed over the last week about that we're rushing into this. And so I appreciate what Secretary McCarthy said about him having concerns, but he's not asking for a delay. Mr. Chair, I might be looking to work with you to talk about how we make sure all our ducks in a row before we do this, because it could have severe consequences to our healthcare system.
Could I just stress the importance of the military medical education? Just like you said, all the doctors, the graduate military education, that's how we get folks to serve in the Army, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah, we could be short people when we need them the most. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We are close to the end. Mr. Secretary General, a number of questions have been left for the record, and additional information is to be supplied. Would expect that would be done in detail and promptly. Again, would reiterate the request of the chair for some detail about those additional 150 people for the headquarters at Futures Command. Additionally, I just would make the observation that I felt all of the answers for the Chinook questions were lacking, and I would close on childcare. The Department of the Army left this brochure for us, and of the 5 initiatives that are highlighted in your brochure, initiatives, is childcare, which you propose cutting by over $36 million. So I wouldn't want to characterize what I think of that, but I would simply say this hearing's adjourned.